I do not care if he is the grandfather. The invitation is revoked, so get him off the steps before my photographer starts rolling. The heavy oak doors of St. Jude Parish clicked shut. That sound cut off the warm organ music playing inside the sanctuary. I stood on the cold granite landing. My fingers squeezed a gold foil envelope so hard, the stiff paper edges cut into my palm. The heavy scent of imported white lilies leaked through the doorframe, sweet and suffocating, completely masking the familiar smell of old pine pews and floor wax I had known for decades. A private security guard in a fitted black suit stepped in front of the entrance. He crossed his arms and blocked the brass handles. "Look, Mr. Whitmore," the young man said, glancing down at a clipboard. "I am just following orders. The client said you are not on the approved guest list." "I am holding the invitation," I told him, keeping my voice low. "My grandson is being baptized in there right now. I am 68 years old. I spent 4 decades running a commercial construction company, hauling lumber and pouring foundation concrete until my shoulders burned. My hands are still rough with calluses from years of hard labor. I am not a man who gets intimidated by a rented bouncer in a cheap suit, but standing outside my own church felt like taking a physical blow to the ribs." The heavy door cracked open again. Emily peeked out. My son's wife wore a custom silk dress and held a clipboard of her own. Her diamond earrings caught the morning light as she stepped onto the landing, pulling the door firmly shut behind her. "Emily," I said, taking a step forward. "Where is Daniel?" "Daniel is inside with Ethan," she snapped, smoothing an invisible wrinkle on her skirt. "And he is too busy preparing for the ceremony to deal with this right now." "To deal with what?" "I came to see my grandson get baptized." I held up the thick cardstock invitation she had mailed me 2 weeks ago. Emily rolled her eyes and sighed, the way a teacher might sigh at a slow student. "I told you on the phone on Tuesday, Harold. We upgraded this to a premium private aesthetic. The videographer is shooting a highly curated family documentary today. You showing up in a flannel suit just does not fit the visual brand we are going for." My jaw tightened. "You are locking me out of Ethan's baptism because of my suit?" "I am keeping you out because this is my day," she corrected, stepping closer. Her voice dropped to a harsh, flat whisper. "You are embarrassing. You always smell like sawdust, you talk too loud, and I am not letting you ruin the photos for my social media. Now go home before I have security arrest you for trespassing." She turned her back, gave a sharp nod to the guard, and slipped back inside the church. The deadbolt clicked into place. I stood there for a long moment. The parking lot was full of expensive luxury cars I did not recognize, mostly belonging to Emily's wealthy friends from her event planning agency. Not a single person from our actual parish community was here, because Emily had demanded a complete venue buyout to keep the locals away. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. Daniel was not calling. No one was coming to open the door. I walked down the granite steps, the sound of my boots heavy against the stone. I did not yell. I did not bang on the glass. I just walked to my old pickup truck, parked near the back fence, climbed into the driver's seat, and closed the door. The cab smelled of old leather and stale coffee. I placed the gold foil invitation on the dashboard. Then I dialed the parish office direct line. The phone rang twice before Sarah answered. She was the parish administrator, and we had known each other for 15 years. "St. Jude Parish, this is Sarah," she said. Her voice sounded breathless, accompanied by the loud clattering of catering trays in the background. "Sarah, it is Harold Whitmore." "Harold, are you inside yet?" She paused to shout instructions to a vendor. "I am stuck in the fellowship hall, supervising the caterers for Emily. This premium package is a nightmare to coordinate, but your son's wife insisted on having church staff oversee every detail." "I am in the parking lot," I said quietly. "Emily just had her private security throw me off the property." The clattering on the other end of the line stopped completely. "She what?" "Harold, that is impossible. You are the grandfather." She revoked my invitation, told me I do not fit her aesthetic, and locked the front doors. I gripped the steering wheel, watching the stained glass windows of the church glow in the morning sun. "Sarah, you are in the office. I need you to open the filing cabinet behind your desk." "I am walking there right now," she said, her tone shifting from frantic to dead serious. I heard a door click shut, blocking out the catering noise. "Okay, I am at the cabinet." Pull the Whitmore Parish Endowment folder. Go to the master contract I signed 20 years ago. I listened to the rustle of heavy paper, the squeak of a metal drawer opening, and the flipping of thick pages. My wife and I established that charity fund a long time ago to keep the church doors open for everyone. "I have it," Sarah told me. "Read Section 4, the Family Access Clause." She read the text out loud. Any private event utilizing parish grounds must maintain open access for immediate family members. If the facility is used to unreasonably exclude family, the charitable grant subsidy for that event is immediately voided. Sarah stopped reading. She took a sharp breath. Harold, if I trigger this clause today, the church cannot subsidize Emily's ceremony. The grant credit is suspended. She will be billed the full commercial rate for a private venue buyout, including the choir, the security, and the catering staff. That bill will be thousands of dollars. I stared at the heavy oak doors that my money had paid to restore 10 years ago. Suspend the credit, I said. Print the bill and hand it to her. The line went completely silent for a few seconds. I could hear Sarah breathing on the other end, processing what I had just asked her to do. Then came the heavy sound of a filing cabinet drawer sliding open over the phone speaker. The Whitmore Endowment, Sarah murmured, mostly to herself. Thick paper shuffled. Harold, you set this up right after your wife passed away, 20 years ago. And the rules have not changed since then, I told her, stepping out of my truck. The gravel crunched under my heavy work boots. I left the parking lot and walked toward the east side of the sanctuary. St. Jude was a beautiful stone building, flanked by a small prayer garden that smelled strongly of damp soil and blooming hydrangeas. I followed the flagstone path until I reached the side transept doors. They were made of thick, clear glass, designed to let the morning light flood the altar. I stopped right there, pressing my free hand against the cold stone wall, and looked inside. Emily had turned the sacred space into a movie set. 2 massive rings of imported white orchids flanked the baptismal font. A videographer circled the altar with a heavy camera rig, completely blocking the view of the wooden cross. My daughter-in-law stood in the center of it all, adjusting the lace collar on my grandson's christening gown. She looked radiant, completely in her element, smiling, a practiced, perfect smile for the lens. She had absolutely no idea that her entire production relied on a piece of paper sitting in Sarah's office. I have the event contract, Sarah said through the phone, her voice tight with disbelief. Emily signed it 3 weeks ago. She bypassed the standard parish application and went straight for the premium private buyout package. She demanded exclusive use of the sanctuary, private security, and specialized vendors. Who signed as the financially responsible party? I asked, watching Daniel walk up the aisle. Emily did. She put her own name on the liability clause. Sarah paused, and I heard the rapid clicking of a computer mouse. She bypassed Daniel entirely because she wanted full creative control over the vendor list. She assumed the Whitmore family grant would just sweep the balance clean at the end of the day. That is how the system is set up. The grant is an unreleased credit that applies only when the event concludes. Unless the family access clause is violated, I reminded her. Inside the church, my son stopped at the first row of pews. Daniel wore a sharp navy suit, looking exhausted. He glanced at the empty space at the end of the bench, the spot reserved for the grandfather. I watched him pull his phone from his pocket, tap the screen, and frown. He turned toward Emily, pointing at the empty seat, his mouth moving in a quick, anxious question. Emily did not even look at him. The event planner simply waved her manicured hand, brushing my son off like a minor inconvenience, and turned her chin to catch the best lighting for the videographer. A familiar weight settled in my chest. Daniel had always been quiet, always willing to shrink himself to keep the peace. He had married a woman who demanded all the oxygen in the room, and he spent every day suffocating just to keep her happy. But this was not about my son's weak spine today. This was about a line being crossed. Father Michael stepped out from the sacristy, wearing his heavy white and gold vestments. He carried the brass holy water vessel, but his steps were slow. He looked extremely uncomfortable with the camera crew crowding his altar. As he approached the font, the priest lifted his head and looked directly toward the side gardens. His eyes met mine through the glass. Father Michael stopped dead in his tracks. Father Michael instinctively took one step toward the side door. Every instinct in him screamed to stop the ceremony immediately. But Ethan had done nothing wrong, and disrupting a sacrament would only punish an innocent child. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, silently asking for wisdom, then continued toward the font. He already knew this conversation with Harold could not wait until the reception. His grip tightened on the brass vessel. He knew exactly who had paid to repair that stained glass above him, who had funded the new roof, and who quietly kept the community food pantry stocked every winter. Seeing the primary benefactor of the church standing in the dirt outside while a rented security guard patrolled the front doors made the color drain from the priest's face. He looked from me to Emily, suddenly realizing the gravity of what she had done. Harold, Sarah said, bringing my attention back to the phone. Because this is a premium private event, church policy requires administrative supervision. That is why I am here today instead of at home. I am required to verify all vendor compliance and finalize the billing before the family leaves the property. So, you can review the grant status right now. I am looking at the ledger on my screen, the administrator confirmed, her tone turning brisk and professional. The grant credit is officially marked as pending. If I void it under Section 4, the safety net disappears. The church will bill Emily for the raw commercial cost of every single luxury service she demanded. I watched my grandson sleep peacefully in Emily's arms. The videographer moved in for a close-up. Emily smiled, a woman completely certain of her power, completely convinced she could rewrite reality to fit her aesthetic. She had tried to erase me from my own family because I did not look wealthy enough for her social media followers. She used my church as a prop and my charity as a blank check. Void the credit, Sarah, I said, my voice steady against the cold glass. Do not reclaim any past donations. Just freeze today's unreleased funds. Let the baptism proceed as a purely commercial transaction. The system is updating now, Sarah replied, the sound of keys clacking loudly over the line. The grant is suspended. The balance is no longer zero. I did not ask how much the balance would be. That number was no longer my concern. Whatever Emily had agreed to on paper belonged to her, not me. Sarah took a slow breath. $15,000. Payable immediately upon the conclusion of the sacrament. I looked at Father Michael. He gave me a very small, very solemn nod through the window, then turned to begin the service. Print the bill, I told Sarah, turning my back on the glass doors and walking toward my truck. I am printing it on the heavy red letterhead, Sarah said, and I will hand it to her myself the second that camera turns off. I lowered my phone and leaned against the rusted quarter panel of my truck. The morning air had warmed up, carrying the scent of cut grass and warm asphalt. Behind me, the muffled voices of the choir bled through the thick stone walls of St. Jude. They were singing a hymn my late wife used to hum while she folded laundry on Sunday afternoons. 20 years ago, that same choir sounded hollow. We had buckets lining the center aisle back then, catching rainwater that dripped through the rotting cedar roof. My wife had been gone for exactly 3 months. The silence in our house had become too heavy, so I spent my evenings sitting in the back pew of the church, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. When Father Michael's predecessor announced the parish might have to close its doors due to bankruptcy, I made a decision. I did not simply write a check. I brought my construction crew. We spent 6 weeks up on scaffolding, tearing out dry rot and laying down new slate. The leather seat of my truck grew hot against my back as I remembered those days. I stared at the large stained glass window depicting St. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes. I had installed that window myself. The leaded glass weighed over 100 pounds, and my back ached for a week after hoisting it into place. I did the work because I wanted my son to have a place that felt like home. I took the bulk of my life savings and set up the Whitmore Endowment. The goal was simple: keep the community together. Ensure no family ever felt pushed out because they lacked the money to belong. Every baptism, every community pantry, and every youth group retreat was quietly backed by that fund. The only rule I ever put in writing was that the church must remain a place for family. Now, my daughter-in-law was using the sanctuary my calluses paid for to host a private photo shoot, treating the local parishioners like unwanted pests. She thought the church was just a pretty backdrop, a free venue provided by her husband's family name. She had absolutely no idea that the safety net she was standing on had strings attached. I checked my watch. The baptism sacrament usually takes about 45 minutes. Emily would likely drag it out to an hour to ensure the videographer captured every angle. I climbed into the cab of my truck, rolled down the windows, and waited. I knew exactly what was about to happen next, but knowing it did not make the waiting any easier. My phone vibrated on the dashboard. The screen illuminated with Daniel's name. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. Dad. My son's voice came through sharp, echoing slightly like he was standing in a tiled hallway. Where are you? The service just ended, and everyone is moving to the fellowship hall. Emily said, you decided to stay home because you were not feeling well. Is that what she told you? I watched a flock of pigeons scatter from the bell tower. Yes. A long pause stretched over the line. But you never miss a Sunday service, let alone Ethan's baptism. Are you actually sick? I was standing on the front steps at 9 o'clock this morning, Daniel. I wore the charcoal suit you bought me for Christmas. The line went quiet, except for the faint sound of chatter in the background. My son was piecing the timeline together. The security guard, Daniel finally whispered. I saw a guard at the main entrance. Emily told me the agency provided him for crowd control. He controlled the crowd. All right. He told me my invitation was revoked. She locked you out? Daniel sounded breathless. The reality of his wife's actions was finally breaking through his usual fog of compliance. Dad, this does not make any sense. She looked me in the eye 10 minutes ago and swore you had a stomach bug. I am coming outside right now. Stay where you are, I instructed, gripping the steering wheel. You need to be next to your wife in a few minutes. Why? I am not going to just stand here and pretend this is okay. Why would she do this? You should ask her, I replied calmly. Ask her if a retired construction worker in an old suit fit her brand image. Brand image? This is our son's baptism. Because actions have consequences, Daniel. And Emily is about to learn exactly how this church operates. Dad, what did you do? I did not answer him immediately. Through the windshield, I had a clear view of the covered walkway connecting the sanctuary to the fellowship hall. The heavy wooden doors swung open, spilling well-dressed guests into the sunlight. Emily emerged a moment later. She was holding little Ethan, laughing for a camera lens that hovered 2 feet from her face. She looked triumphant, completely unaware that her perfect narrative was about to collapse. Then, Sarah walked out of the administrative office. The parish administrator did not look happy. She held a single sheet of heavy red paper in her right hand. That specific color of paper was reserved for immediate financial notices. I watched Sarah march straight through the crowd of event planners and wealthy friends, making a direct line for my daughter-in-law. Dad, Daniel repeated, his voice tight with panic. What is happening? I am protecting the charity funds, I said quietly, watching Sarah tap Emily on the shoulder. The church is delivering the bill. I kept the phone pressed hard against my ear. Through the windshield of my truck, the bright midday sun illuminated the church courtyard perfectly. Daniel was still on the open line, and his uneven breathing sounded loud against the small speaker. He stood just a few yards away from his wife, watching Sarah approach the group. The parish administrator moved with a stiff, professional march, holding that single sheet of red paper like a court summons. Emily was busy adjusting the lace collar on my sleeping grandson. The videographer circled her, constantly shifting to capture the best lighting for her social media feed. She did not even look up when Sarah stopped right in front of the camera lens. Excuse me, Sarah said. Her voice echoed through Daniel's phone, crisp and loud enough to cut through the chatter of the wealthy guests. Emily finally turned. A polite, highly irritated smile stretched across her face. We are right in the middle of shooting the reception intro, she snapped, waving a manicured hand toward the building. Please check with the catering staff if you need a signature for the buffet delivery. I do not need a catering signature, the administrator replied, holding out the red document. I need to present the final invoice for the facility buyout. The total is $15,000, payable today. The polite smile vanished from my daughter-in-law's face. The videographer slowly lowered his heavy camera rig, suddenly realizing the scene unfolding in front of him was not meant for a curated family documentary. Emily let out a sharp, breathless laugh. She snatched the paper from Sarah's hand, barely glancing at the bold text. This is a mistake. We are the Whitmore family, and this church is subsidized for our private events. My husband's family has an arrangement. You did have an arrangement, Sarah corrected, standing her ground completely. But the grant credit relies entirely on the family access clause. When you hired private security to forcefully remove the grandfather of the baptized child from parish grounds, you violated the core terms of the charitable endowment. The subsidy has been officially suspended. Over the phone, I heard Daniel let out a low, ragged breath. He was standing close enough to hear every single word, and the reality of his wife's lie was finally settling in. This is absolutely ridiculous, Emily hissed, her voice trembling with sudden anger. That old man showed up looking like a homeless person. He did not match the visual aesthetic of the ceremony, and he would have ruined thousands of dollars worth of professional photography. I had every right to deny him entry to my private event. You rented a church, not a country club, Sarah explained calmly. The endowment exists to keep families together. Because you used parish grounds to exclude a family member, the office is now billing you the full commercial rate for every luxury vendor, the private security detail, and the exclusive sanctuary reservation. I sat in the hot cab of my truck, listening to the heavy silence that followed. For the first time in years, Emily had encountered a boundary she could not simply complain her way out of. Her image-driven world was crashing into a solid brick wall of legal compliance, and she had no idea how to handle the impact. "Fine," Emily said, her tone dripping with venom. She turned and pointed a finger directly at my son. "Give the invoice to Daniel. He will put it on the joint credit card, and we will deal with the accounting on Monday. Right now, I want you out of my camera frame." Daniel did not move. He just stared at the woman he had married, his face completely pale. "I cannot give the invoice to your husband," Sarah stated, her voice projecting clearly over the quiet courtyard. "Daniel did not sign the event contract." "What are you talking about?" Emily demanded, stepping forward and crumpling the edge of the paper. "When you booked this package 30 days ago, you explicitly bypassed your husband to maintain full creative control over the vendor list." Sarah pointed to the bottom of the red page. "You signed the liability clause yourself. You placed your own name as the sole financially responsible party. The church requires payment from you, not him." The catering staff had stopped setting up the tables by the side doors. Dozens of well-dressed guests stood in awkward silence, holding expensive champagne flutes, watching the perfect event planner unravel in real time. Emily looked down at the red paper, her manicured nails digging deep into the thick cardstock. "Daniel," she commanded, not looking up, "give her your card. Now." My son slowly raised his phone closer to his mouth. "Dad," he whispered into the receiver, "are you hearing this?" "I hear it," I replied softly. Daniel lowered the phone but did not hang up the call. I watched him take 2 steps toward his wife. He did not reach into his jacket for his wallet. Instead, he looked at the security guard standing near the entrance, then down at the red invoice crushed in Emily's fist. "You looked me in the eye," Daniel said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a sharp, unfamiliar edge that cut through the warm morning air. "You told me my father was sick. You swore to me he decided to stay home. He was going to ruin the video," Emily pleaded, dropping the angry act and instantly shifting into a victim stance. "Daniel, you know how he is. He is so stubborn, and he never dresses appropriately. I was just trying to protect the memories of our son's special day." "You hired a man to physically block my father from entering the church," Daniel continued, each word heavy with betrayal. "You locked him out of his own grandson's baptism just so your pictures would look better for strangers on the internet." Emily reached out to touch his arm, her eyes wide and shining with forced tears. "Please, let us just pay this stupid bill and go inside. People are staring at us. We can talk about this at home tonight." Daniel stepped back, letting her hand drop into empty air. I watched his shoulders stiffen under his dark suit. He looked like a man waking up from a very long, very deep sleep, and the sudden daylight was blinding him. "I want the truth right now," Daniel demanded, his voice echoing across the quiet courtyard. "Look me in the eye and tell me exactly what you did to my father." Emily let out a shaky breath, and the sound carried clearly through the phone speaker sitting in my hand. She glanced around at the silent crowd of guests in the courtyard. Her perfect, camera-ready smile was completely gone, replaced by a tight mask of panic. "I did not lock him out," she said, lowering her voice to a furious whisper. "There was a miscommunication with the vendor. The security team was supposed to redirect him to the side entrance, so he would not walk through the main camera shot. But that idiot overreacted." Daniel turned his head slowly. He looked at the young man in the fitted black suit standing near the heavy oak doors. The guard had been watching the entire exchange, and his posture stiffened when my son started walking toward him. I kept the phone pressed to my ear, stepped out of my truck, and closed the door as quietly as I could. The gravel crunched under my heavy work boots, but I stayed behind the line of parked cars, watching the confrontation unfold in the bright morning sun. "Did you misunderstand my wife?" Daniel asked the guard. His voice was dangerously calm, completely lacking any of the usual hesitation he carried when dealing with Emily. The young man crossed his arms, looking offended. "I did exactly what I was paid to do, Mr. Whitmore. I work for a professional agency, and we do not make mistakes with the access roster." "Show me," Daniel demanded. Emily hurried across the flagstones, her high heels clicking sharply against the rock. "Daniel, stop it right now. You are making a scene in front of my clients. Just give Sarah your credit card to pay the bill and we can fix this misunderstanding at home." My son ignored her completely. He held out his hand toward the guard. "Show me the instructions you were given." The guard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his smartphone. He tapped the screen a few times, his jaw set with irritation. He was clearly not about to lose his job over a wealthy client trying to shift the blame. He turned the screen toward Daniel. "I received this email 7 days ago directly from the event planning account," the the guard explained. The instructions were very specific, and they were highlighted in red. Daniel took the phone. He stood absolutely still for a moment, his eyes scanning the glowing screen. Then, he began to read the text out loud, his voice carrying over the open line straight into my ear. Subject line, VIP access roster and restrictions. Daniel swallowed hard, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the device. Section 3. Under no circumstances is Harold Whitmore to be admitted to the sanctuary or the reception area. If he attempts to enter, deny access immediately. Use physical redirection if necessary. Do not notify the groom. The courtyard went completely silent. Even the catering staff had stopped arranging the champagne glasses on the buffet tables. The morning breeze rustled the leaves of the large oak tree near the entrance, and that was the only sound left in the world. I lowered my phone and pressed the end call button. I did not need to listen through a speaker anymore. I walked out from behind the row of luxury cars and stepped onto the main stone path, heading straight toward the gathering. Emily stood frozen, staring at her husband. Her face had drained of all color. "Daniel," she whispered, reaching out to touch his arm. That was just boilerplate language. The agency uses those templates for high-security events, and I simply forgot to edit that section. You know, we talked about this last week. You agreed that your father might be too disruptive for the professional videographer. I never agreed to anything, Daniel fired back, violently pulling his arm away from her reach. His voice finally broke with raw emotion. You told me he caught a stomach bug. You looked me in the eyes this morning while tying my tie and said it was a terrible shame. My dad was too sick to see his only grandson get baptized. Father Michael stepped out of the crowd, his heavy white vestments brushing against the stone path. The priest looked deeply sorrowful. He walked past Emily, past the defensive security guard, and came to a stop right in front of me. "Harold," the priest said softly, offering his hand. "I am so deeply sorry. I had absolutely no idea you were standing outside. If I had known, I would have stopped the ceremony immediately and opened those doors myself." I shook his hand, my grip firm and steady. "It is not your fault, Father. The church is not responsible for the lies told at the front gate." I turned my attention to my daughter-in-law. She looked like a cornered animal, frantically searching for a way out of the trap she had built for herself. The $15,000 invoice still crumpled in her fist was just paper, but the email glowing on that guard's phone was a lit match dropped right in the middle of her marriage. "Harold was aggressive," Emily suddenly blurted out, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. She was grasping at straws, desperate to save her reputation in front of her wealthy friends and clients. He came to the door yelling and making a scene. He tried to push his way past the guard, and that is why he was turned away. He was going to ruin everything. The security guard let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "Lady, that old man did not raise his voice once. He just looked sad, showed me his invitation, and walked away when I told him to leave." "He is lying to protect himself," Emily insisted, her voice turning shrill. "You are all misunderstanding what happened at that door." Sarah, the parish administrator, stepped forward. She smoothed her skirt and looked at Emily with absolute professional detachment. "There is a very simple way to clear up any confusion about what happened this morning." Daniel turned to Sarah, his eyes hollow but entirely focused. "How?" "St. Jude upgraded the exterior security system last year," Sarah explained, gesturing toward the brick archway directly above the heavy oak doors. "We have a high-definition camera pointed straight at the front landing. It records both audio and video. If we pull the footage from this morning, we will see exactly who was aggressive, and we will hear exactly what your wife said when she locked her father-in-law out of the church." Daniel looked back at his wife. His face hardened into something cold and unrecognizable. "Pull the footage," my son said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I want to see every single second of it." We did not walk to the administrative office as a family. Daniel marched ahead, his strides long and rigid, leaving the stunned crowd of reception guests murmuring in the sunny courtyard. Emily stumbled after him, her high heels struggling to keep pace on the uneven flagstones. She kept reaching for his elbow, and he kept pulling his arm away, never once looking back at her. Sarah unlocked the heavy oak door to the parish records room. The small space smelled strongly of old paper, floor wax, and the sharp ozone scent of a running copy machine. Father Michael followed us inside, gently closing the door to block out the noise of the ruined party. I stood near the back wall, crossing my arms over my charcoal suit, watching the woman who had tried to erase me completely, run out of places to hide. The administrator sat at her desk and woke up the computer monitor. The screen cast a pale blue light across the cramped room, illuminating the dust motes floating in the air. The new security cameras record directly to a secure server, Sarah explained, her fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. They capture high-definition video and directional audio from the front landing. Give me a moment to pull the timestamp from 9 o'clock this morning. Daniel, you do not need to watch this, Emily pleaded. Her voice lacked its usual polish, sounding thin and desperate in the quiet office. The microphone probably distorted everything. It was windy out there, and you know how easily things get taken out of context. My son leaned over the desk, placing both hands flat on the wooden surface. His knuckles were completely white. "Play it," he ordered. A moment later, the video filled the screen. There I was, walking up the granite steps in my heavy boots. The audio was crystal clear, capturing the faint sound of the choir singing inside the sanctuary. We heard the heavy door open, and we watched the digital version of Emily step onto the landing. I watched my son's face as he heard his wife's real voice for the very first time. "You showing up in a flannel suit just does not fit the visual brand we are going for," the recorded voice echoed through the small office. On the screen, Emily sneered at me, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. "You are embarrassing, Harold. Today is extremely complicated. We have sponsors, media people, and clients everywhere. Please understand, I promised everyone a very controlled guest list. Maybe we can celebrate together afterward. Please, don't make this difficult." The footage showed me turning around and walking away without raising my voice once. The digital Emily gave a sharp, satisfied nod to the guard before slipping back inside, her custom silk dress swishing around her ankles. The young security guard stood near the doorway, holding his uniform cap in his hands. He cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence in the room. "Like I told you, Mr. Whitmore," the young man said, pointing at the frozen frame on the monitor. "I was just following the instructions I was given." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded piece of heavy paper, and placed it on the desk next to the keyboard. "That is the master guest list your wife handed me at 8 o'clock this morning," the guard continued. "Not an email template. The actual physical roster for the front door." Daniel picked up the sheet of paper. I could see my own name printed near the top, right under the immediate family section. A thick, dark line of red ink was drawn aggressively through my name, tearing slightly into the paper. Next to it, in Emily's distinct, looping handwriting, were the words, "Do not admit. Lock doors if he arrives." "A boilerplate template," Daniel whispered, staring at the bright red ink. He slowly turned his head to look at his wife. "You stood in our kitchen this morning, drinking coffee, and you told me my father was too sick to get out of bed. Meanwhile, you had already crossed his name off this list with a red pen." The event planner had absolutely no defense left. She shrank back against the tall metal filing cabinets, looking completely out of place in the dusty administrative office. "I was doing it for us," she cried, tears finally spilling over her cheeks and ruining her perfect makeup. "He does not fit in with our friends, Daniel. He makes people uncomfortable. I just wanted one perfect day where we looked like a proper, successful family." I did not yell at her. I did not step forward to gloat, nor did I demand an apology, because an apology forced by a security camera meant absolutely nothing. I simply stood by the wall and looked at the woman who cared more about the approval of strangers on the internet than the blood running through her own son's veins. My silence seemed to unnerve her more than any shouting ever could, and she quickly looked away from my face. Father Michael sighed heavily, the sound filling the tense silence in the room. He stepped forward and picked up the red invoice that Emily had abandoned on the desk earlier. "This goes far beyond a simple unpaid bill, Emily," the priest said gently, though his eyes remained firm and unwavering. "The Whitmore Endowment is a legally binding, charitable trust. By intentionally lying to use those funds while violating the core charter of the grant, you have committed financial misconduct against the parish." Sarah nodded, shutting off the computer monitor and plunging the room back into normal daylight. "Because you signed the liability contract under false pretenses, I am required by church bylaws to report this infraction to the Finance Committee. We cannot simply look the other way when charity funds are manipulated." Daniel dropped the guest list onto the desk. He looked completely hollowed out, as if the foundation of his entire life had just collapsed beneath his feet, leaving him standing on empty air. "What does that mean?" my son asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It means the formal parish review begins on Monday morning," Sarah answered softly, folding her hands together. "And the committee will decide exactly how publicly your wife is going to answer for this." 48 hours later, The air inside the parish conference room felt incredibly heavy. The small space smelled of stale coffee and sharp lemon wood polish. A long mahogany table filled the center of the room, surrounded by the 7 members of the church finance and events committee. I sat at the far end, wearing my usual flannel shirt and denim work jeans. My calloused hands rested flat on the polished wood. Emily sat directly across from me. The event planner looked nothing like the radiant, confident woman from Saturday morning. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and she wore a plain gray blazer that looked 2 sizes too big. She kept shuffling a stack of registration forms, her manicured nails tapping a frantic, uneven rhythm against the table. Daniel sat 2 chairs away from her. My son stared blankly at a water stain on the ceiling, completely silent. He had not spoken to his wife since we left the church courtyard. Father Michael called the meeting to order. The priest looked deeply exhausted, rubbing the bridge of his nose before nodding to the parish administrator. Sarah stood up and handed out thick packets of photocopied documents to every committee member. "These forms are standard," Emily argued immediately, her voice vibrating with forced authority. She leaned forward, trying to command the room the way she always did at family dinners. I filled out the venue request, just like any other parishioner. The security detail was simply a mandated precaution for a high-profile photography crew. You are blowing a simple administrative oversight completely out of proportion. Sarah stopped handing out the papers and looked down at my daughter-in-law. "You are not just a parishioner, Emily. You sit on the events board. You know the bylaws better than anyone else in this room." The administrator pointed a plastic pen at the second page of the document resting in front of me. "And you did not just book the sanctuary for a single baptism. When I processed your suspended grant credit on Monday morning, the accounting software triggered an automatic audit of your user profile." I looked down at the photocopied page. A cold, sharp realization settled over me as I read the bold text at the top of the form. "I found 5 additional premium event registrations filed under the Whitmore family name," Sarah told the silent room. "You booked the fellowship hall and the main sanctuary for 3 luxury weddings and 2 corporate charity galas scheduled over the next 12 months. The conference room went completely still. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to drop away. Emily had not just used my charity to fund her social media aesthetic. She was actively pre-booking the church for her wealthy clients, planning to charge them premium commercial rates for the venue. She intended to pass the actual operating costs onto my charitable endowment, using her marriage to my son as a blank check to subsidize her business overhead. "That is a misunderstanding," Emily stammered. Her face flushed a deep, blotchy red, and her perfectly practiced posture finally collapsed. She shrank back into her leather chair. "I was just holding those dates on the calendar. I was fully planning to pay the standard rental fees before the events took place." Daniel finally looked away from the ceiling. He slowly turned his head toward his wife. His expression was completely hollow, stripped of all the gentle patience he had carried for the last 7 years. "With what money?" my son asked softly. Emily froze, her mouth slightly open. "I checked our joint accounts yesterday afternoon," Daniel continued, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Your event planning business is completely overdrawn. You maxed out 2 credit cards, paying for imported orchids and private videographers. You were going to let my father pay the operating costs for your clients, and you were going to pocket the profit." One of the older committee members, a retired local banker named Thomas, threw his pen onto the table. It clattered loudly against the mahogany. "This goes beyond breaking parish rules," Thomas stated, glaring at the event planner. "This is premeditated financial exploitation. The board should immediately file a police report for attempted fraud." Emily gasped, covering her mouth with a trembling hand. She looked wildly around the room, her eyes finally locking onto mine. She was begging for the family patriarch to step in, to save the precious brand image she had sacrificed so much to build. I did not raise my voice. I did not pound my fist on the table or demand dramatic vengeance. True justice rarely requires screaming. "No police," I told the committee quietly. Thomas frowned. "Harold, she tried to steal from a charity fund meant to feed the poor." "I am well aware of what she did," I replied, holding Emily's terrified gaze. "But the Whitmore name has built this community for decades, and I will not drag my grandson's family through a public courthouse. We handle our own messes." My son stood up from his chair. He walked slowly around the long table, ignoring his wife completely, and stopped right beside me. Daniel placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. His grip was tight, grounding both of us in the miserable reality of the moment. "I am so sorry, Dad," Daniel said. His voice grew thick with unshed tears, but he kept his head held high. I was blind. I let her treat you like a burden because it was easier than fighting her every single day. I stood by while she pushed you away, and I will never make that mistake again. I reached up and patted his hand. The rough calluses on my palms scratched against his knuckles. That simple touch was all the forgiveness he needed. Father Michael closed the thick evidence folder and folded his hands together. The priest looked around the mahogany table, his gaze settling heavily on the woman who had tried to turn his sacred sanctuary into a luxury stage. "The facts of this situation are entirely clear," the priest announced, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate or excuses. "I am calling for an immediate committee vote on 2 formal motions regarding Emily Whitmore." The first motion passed without a single dissenting voice. Thomas, the retired banker, slid the official committee minutes across the mahogany table, and I watched Emily stare at the thick black ink confirming her immediate removal from the parish events board. She did not argue this time, because the fight had completely drained out of her. Father Michael presented the second motion while Sarah prepared the final paperwork. The church would not press criminal fraud charges, but the $15,000 invoice was now legally binding. The parish administrator handed my daughter-in-law a strict 12-month payment plan. If Emily missed a single installment, the parish would immediately send the debt to a commercial collection agency and report the attempted fraud to the local police department. Emily signed the document with a shaking hand, her perfect image completely shattered in front of the very people she had tried to impress. 3 days later, the heavy summer humidity finally broke, leaving a cool breeze sweeping through my backyard. I sat on my wooden porch swing, running a piece of fine sandpaper over a small pine block. The familiar smell of sawdust and wood glue settled my nerves, washing away the lingering tension from the committee room. I heard tires crunching on the gravel driveway, so I brushed the dust off my jeans and stood up. Daniel parked his old sedan near the large oak tree. He had left the expensive luxury cars at the big house, choosing to drive the reliable vehicle he bought before he ever met his wife. My son walked up the wooden steps, holding Ethan securely against his chest. The baby babbled happily, reaching out with tiny hands to grab the collar of my flannel shirt. I took my grandson, feeling the solid, comforting weight of him in my arms. "You look tired," I told my son, guiding him toward the wooden rocking chairs. Daniel sat down heavily, letting out a long, ragged breath. "I moved into a small apartment on the south side of town on Wednesday night," he said softly, staring out at the empty yard. "We are officially separated, and I already spoke to a lawyer about drafting a custody agreement." I rocked Ethan gently, watching the wind rustle the dry leaves on the grass. "How is she handling the financial situation?" I asked. Daniel shook his head, rubbing the back of his neck with his right hand. "She had to list her new SUV for sale this morning just to cover the first installment for the church because her business accounts are completely frozen. Her clients heard about the committee vote, and 3 of those luxury weddings canceled their contracts yesterday. She is sitting in that massive house all alone, watching everything fall apart." I did not feel a rush of victory. Vengeance rarely feels as good as a quiet afternoon on a porch with your family, and I only cared about protecting the boy sitting in my lap. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folded manila envelope. I had visited my own attorney on Thursday afternoon, making sure every legal loophole was permanently closed before the weekend arrived. I handed the thick envelope to Daniel, waiting while he opened the flap. He pulled out a stack of notarized transfer documents, and his brow furrowed as he read the title page. "The Whitmore Endowment is no longer managed by the parish," I explained, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "I transferred the entire principal into an independent community foundation." Daniel looked up from the heavy paper, his eyes wide with surprise. "You took the money away from St. Jude? The church will still receive all their annual grants for the food pantry and the roof maintenance," I corrected him, pointing at the second page of the legal packet. "But the money now flows through a blind trust managed by a third-party firm. St. Jude gets the financial support they need, but the parish office no longer controls the distribution." My son read through the strict liability clauses my lawyer had drafted, "which means nobody in our family can ever claim special privileges at the church again," he realized, his voice full of quiet understanding. I nodded slowly, shifting Ethan to my other shoulder. I never stopped wanting to help the church, but I absolutely refused to fund another ounce of hypocrisy. The family name is permanently removed from the access ledger, so neither Emily nor anyone else can ever use my charity as a weapon again. Before Daniel could say anything else, a sleek silver car turned onto my gravel driveway, driving far too fast for the narrow country road. The vehicle skidded to a halt right next to Daniel's old sedan, kicking up a thick cloud of white dust. Emily threw the driver's side door open and practically stumbled out onto the dirt. She looked frantic. Her gray blazer was wrinkled, her hair hung loose around her shoulders, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She practically ran up the wooden porch steps, ignoring her husband completely, and stopped right in front of my rocking chair. "Harold," she gasped, breathing heavily as she clutched her expensive leather purse against her chest. "You have to call the committee and cancel the payment plan." I kept rocking my grandson, shielding his small head from the sudden noise. "I do not run the committee, Emily." Emily dropped to her knees on the wooden floorboards, her voice cracking with pure desperation. "I am losing my business," she cried, reaching out to grab the edge of my work jeans. "You built that endowment. You have all the power at that church. So please, just tell Father Michael to forgive the debt. I will do whatever you want." The wood floorboards creaked beneath my daughter-in-law. She gripped the fabric of my jeans, digging her manicured nails into the tough denim. Tears ruined her perfect makeup, leaving dark streaks of mascara running down her flushed cheeks. "I am so sorry," she sobbed, looking up at me with wide, panicked eyes. "I was wrong, Harold. I was so stressed about the event business and maintaining a successful image, and I took all of that pressure out on you. Please, just call the committee and make them stop the collection process." I looked down at the woman who had tried to completely erase me from my own family just a few days ago. The warm weight of my grandson rested against my shoulder, his steady breathing a quiet comfort against the chaos happening on my porch. I did not pull my leg away from her grasp, but I also did not reach out to offer any comfort. "An apology means you actually understand the damage you caused," I told her quietly. "You are not crying because you regret locking a grandfather out of a baptism. You are only crying because you got caught trying to steal from a church charity, and now your clients know the truth." "That is not true," Emily pleaded, her voice cracking into a high pitch. "I will write a public apology to the entire parish. I will post it on all my social media accounts. Just tell Father Michael to forgive the debt so my bank will unfreeze my business accounts." Daniel stepped forward, casting a long shadow over the wooden porch. The boards groaned under his heavy work boots. Reaching down, my son grabbed his wife by the elbows and hauled her firmly to her feet. "Stop doing this," Daniel said. His voice was completely empty of the old hesitation, ringing with a solid, undeniable authority. "My father is not going to step in and save your event planning agency, Emily, and neither am I." "Daniel, please," she whispered, reaching out to touch his face. He stepped back immediately, keeping a careful, deliberate distance between them. "I let you treat him like dirt for years because I was too weak to start an argument," my son admitted, his tone heavy with quiet shame. "I take full responsibility for being a coward and letting you push my family away, but that stops today. I am not signing another credit card slip to protect your brand. Get back in your car and go home." Emily looked from her husband to me, her breath catching in her throat. She finally realized that all the practiced manipulation in the world could not fix a bridge she had already burned to ash. Wiping her stained face, the event planner turned around and walked slowly down the wooden steps. We stood in silence and watched her drive away, the silver car moving much slower this time down the dusty gravel road. 2 weeks passed. The brutal summer humidity finally began to break, leaving the morning air crisp and cool. I parked my old pickup truck in the St. Jude lot early on a Tuesday morning. Gravel crunched under my boots as I walked toward the administrative building, enjoying the quiet peace of the empty church grounds. Sarah sat at her desk, organizing a massive stack of heavy white folders. Father Michael stood by the window, holding a freshly printed document in his hands. The priest smiled warmly when I walked into the room, stepping forward to offer me the single piece of paper. "The parish council finalized the new administrative bylaws last night," Father Michael explained, pointing to the bold black text at the very top of the page. "We are calling it the Whitmore Correction." I took the document, feeling the thick, high-quality paper between my calloused fingers. The new policy was incredibly strict. It mandated a thorough background check and a secondary financial audit for every premium event booked at the church. Most importantly, the correction completely removed parish events from the control of any single committee member. "I will personally oversee all commercial vendor contracts from now on," Sarah added from behind her desk. "We restructured the entire approval process. Nobody will ever bypass the family access clause or hide a private security detail on parish grounds again." "This is a good rule," I said, handing the paper back to the priest. "It protects the congregation and keeps the sanctuary doors open for the right reasons." I assumed our business was concluded, ready to head back to my woodshop for the afternoon. But Father Michael was not finished. The priest reached into his heavy vestment pocket and pulled out a second document. This one bore the shiny gold seal of the newly formed Independent Community Foundation. The transition of the endowment funds is almost complete, Father Michael told me, his tone shifting into something much more serious. The third-party accounting firm is ready to take over the ledger tomorrow, but the new board of directors unanimously voted to offer you the chairman's seat, Harold. You would have absolute veto power over every single grant application moving forward. Sarah nodded eagerly, leaning forward in her desk chair. You could personally guarantee that the money goes exactly where you want it to go, she urged. You would never have to worry about someone like Emily slipping through the cracks and misusing the funds again. I looked at the gold seal catching the morning light. Decades ago, I poured my sweat and my life savings into that charitable fund to help people, not to control them. Taking the chairman's seat would just replace my daughter-in-law's vanity with my own selfish pride, turning a gift into a weapon of judgment. No, I replied, shaking my head slowly. The administrator blinked, clearly caught off guard by the refusal. But you funded the entire program. And I gave it away, I reminded her calmly. Charity is not a leash, Sarah. If I sit on that board and judge every single person who asks for help, I am no better than a man charging admission at the front gate. Let the independent directors do their jobs without my shadow hanging over the table. Father Michael studied my face for a long moment. A slow, genuine smile spread across the priest's features. Folding the foundation document, he tucked it safely away inside his jacket. You are a good man, Harold, the priest said softly. Just a retired carpenter, I answered, turning toward the open doorway. Wait, Sarah called out, standing up and stepping around her heavy wooden desk. She held up a small, elegant card printed on thick cream paper. Before you go back to your workshop, we need you to clear your schedule for next Sunday afternoon. I stopped in the doorway, resting my hand on the brass frame. What happens next Sunday? Father Michael walked over and handed me the cream-colored card. The heavy, embossed lettering felt rough against my thumb. The old community wing has finally finished its year-long renovations, the priest explained, his eyes bright with quiet anticipation. We are hosting a new dedication ceremony to officially open the doors to the public. And this time, we are making absolutely sure the real guest of honor is standing at the front of the line to cut the ribbon. The heavy brass shears felt cold against my palm. I stood on the newly poured concrete steps of the St. Jude community wing, listening to the quiet murmur of 50 local parishioners gathered in the Sunday afternoon sun. Father Michael stood to my right, holding one end of a wide red ribbon, and Sarah held the other. Go ahead, Harold, the priest encouraged, offering a warm nod. I squeezed the handles, and the thick fabric separated with a crisp, satisfying sound. The crowd immediately broke into applause. People cheered, clapping their hands and stepping forward to shake mine. This was not a curated, invitation-only production. My neighbors wore simple cotton dresses and faded denim, bringing homemade casseroles and foil-covered plates for the potluck reception waiting inside. The air smelled of baked ziti, fresh paint, and blooming jasmine from the prayer garden. We walked into the new hall together. The high ceilings and wide windows let the natural light pour across rows of sturdy wooden tables. Daniel waited near the back of the room, holding Ethan securely against his chest. My son wore a simple gray sweater instead of a tailored suit, looking more relaxed than he had in years. The dark circles under his eyes were finally starting to fade, replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. I made my way through the crowd, shaking hands and accepting quiet words of thanks from families I had known for decades. When I finally reached my son, he smiled and held out the baby. Ethan babbled happily, reaching his tiny hands toward my face. I took my grandson, settling his small, warm weight against my shoulder. The faint, sweet smell of baby powder and clean laundry instantly washed away the lingering memories of imported lilies and bitter arguments. You did a good job with this place, Dad, Daniel said softly, looking around the bright, crowded room. The community needed this. They built it, I replied, gently patting Ethan on the back. I just provided the lumber. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the parish kids run around the tables. A few weeks ago, this kind of peace felt completely impossible. The foundation transfer documents were officially filed with the state on Friday morning, severing the parish events committee from my bank accounts forever. The independent trust now handled every single grant application, reviewing each request strictly for community benefit rather than social status. My son reached out and smoothed down the collar of Ethan's shirt, He looked down at the floor, hesitating for a fraction of a second before speaking. Emily made her first installment payment yesterday, Daniel mentioned quietly, keeping his eyes on the baby. She sold her luxury sport utility vehicle on Thursday morning, and the bank used most of that cash to cover her overdrawn business accounts. Does she have enough left to manage the church debt? I asked, rocking slowly on my heels. Daniel nodded, though his expression turned deeply somber. She has enough to make the monthly minimums for the $15,000 invoice, but she had to let go of her entire event planning staff. The big house is completely empty now. We finalized the temporary separation paperwork, so I only go over there to pick up Ethan on my designated weekends. She spends her days trying to rebuild her social media channels, but nobody in the local industry wants to work with her after the committee vote went public. I listened to the quiet defeat in his voice, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. I did not take any joy in my daughter-in-law's ruined reputation. The consequences of her actions belonged entirely to her, and I refused to carry the weight of her mistakes. She had spent years treating her family like disposable props, and now she was sitting in a massive, silent mansion with nobody left to impress. I am focusing on him now, Daniel continued, gently tapping his son's nose. We are starting over. No more fake aesthetics or hidden agendas. Just honest living. That is exactly what he needs, I told my son, feeling a profound sense of relief wash over my tired shoulders. And that is what you need, too. Father Michael walked over, carrying 2 small paper cups of fruit punch. He handed one to Daniel and raised his own cup toward me. To new beginnings, the priest toasted, his eyes crinkling at the corners. And to the people who quietly keep the foundation strong. I looked around the bustling fellowship hall. Families sat together, sharing food and laughter, without worrying about how they looked on a camera lens. The Whitmore Endowment no longer existed on parish ledgers, but the money still flowed exactly where it was needed. I never stopped funding the church. I just stopped funding the hypocrisy that threatened to rot it from the inside out. Taking a deep breath of the fresh, paint-scented air, I held my grandson a little closer. The heavy oak doors at the front of the sanctuary were propped wide open, catching the warm summer breeze, and they would stay that way. Nobody would ever be locked out of this family again. When you look back at Emily's sudden downfall, it is incredibly easy to focus only on the $15,000 invoice or the total collapse of her luxury event planning business. But the real educational lesson resting at the heart of this entire ordeal has absolutely nothing to do with money, canceled contracts, or public embarrassment. It is about the dangerous, hollow illusion of the perfect image. We live in a world that constantly begs you to curate your life, to filter out the messy, unpolished realities of human connection just to impress absolute strangers. Emily traded the genuine love of a grandfather for a pristine social media aesthetic, completely forgetting that a family is not a brand to be managed. A family is a living, breathing foundation built on mutual respect, shared history, and unconditional inclusion. When you start treating the people who love you like disposable props in your own personal stage play, you eventually find yourself standing on a completely empty stage. True wealth and lasting legacy are never measured by the designer label on your dress or the imported flowers framing your photographs. They are measured by the quiet, uncelebrated sacrifices you make when no cameras are rolling. Harold did not need to shout about his generosity or demand front-row seating to prove his worth to the congregation. He simply carried the weight of his community with calloused hands and a steady, reliable heart. You probably know this truth better than anyone, because you have likely spent your own life quietly holding the pieces of your family together through the hardest seasons. You understand that real respect is never demanded through force, locked doors, or emotional manipulation. It is earned through decades of showing up, doing the hard, invisible work, and keeping the doors open for the people who need you the most. Generosity should never be twisted into a leash, and your kindness should never be exploited as a weakness by the people you are trying to help. Harold's final decision to move his charitable endowment into an independent trust is a powerful reminder that setting firm boundaries is not an act of cruelty. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can possibly do for someone is to step back and allow them to face the absolute, unfiltered consequences of their own selfish actions. You cannot protect someone from the fire if they are the one constantly lighting the matches. By refusing to rescue Emily from her financial disaster, Harold gave his son the clarity needed to finally break free from a deeply toxic cycle. He protected his grandson's future by refusing to fund a lie in the present. We have all encountered someone who places their personal vanity above the feelings of the people around them. Someone who is perfectly willing to sacrifice real relationships on the altar of public perception just to maintain a flawless facade. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with a family member who cared more about keeping up appearances than they cared about your actual well-being? How did you finally find the courage to stop subsidizing their illusions and stand your ground? Share your own stories and experiences in the comments below, because your personal journey of setting healthy boundaries might be exactly what another listener desperately needs to hear today.